Brilliance Audio presents Citizen Washington by William Martin, performed by John Pruden. George Washington was dead, and all of America mourned, except perhaps for my uncle. In Philadelphia, thousands marched behind an empty hearse. In New York, church bells chimed a sonorous requiem. In Boston, eulogies issued forth from every pulpit and every parlor. But from Alexandria, Virginia, Uncle Hesperus wrote, "Nothing better than the death of a demigod to help sell newspapers." He expressed this sentiment in a letter inviting me to come and work for him at the Alexandria Gazette. "The Southern drapers," he wrote, "should not be the only drapers to benefit from our national sorrow." I agreed, though between the Boston and Virginia branches of our family there was little agreement on anything, least of all national matters. But on one thing all drapers agreed. Uncle Hesperus had known Washington for long enough and intimately enough and tempestuously enough that nothing he said about America's first icon would surprise anyone, North or South. So I headed for Virginia. I arrived in Alexandria in the last week of the last year of the last century, determined to learn all that I could about the business of newspapering. Uncle Hesperus often said that in America, the man who owned the printing presses could protect himself as well as the man who owned the artillery, at least until the shooting started. He would then produce a brace of pistols, set them on his desk, and add that it was best to own both. I can still recall my surprise at the vibrant presence behind his desk. My uncle was 67, brother to my father's father, which made him a great-uncle, in fact, but he was no decrepit ancient. Here was a man who had fought Indians on the Monongahela, ridden at the front of the Continental line in the brutal heat of Monmouth, and sown a small empire in the rocky soil of American publishing. Those deeds were ageless, and so it seemed was he. As he rose to greet me, he looked like a whip, long and thin and leathered, sheathed in a brown coat and lighter brown waistcoat that were no more than gradations of color complementing brown hair and tanned skin. As his hand snapped toward me, the rawhide face brightened, and he said, "25, and you still don't know what you want to do with yourself?" "I want to be a writer, sir," I said eagerly. He laughed at that. "When a man says he wants to be a writer before he's been anything else, he's saying he doesn't really know what he wants to be." "A harsh judgment, sir," I said, trying to meet his gaze rather than the tops of my shoes. "I did study the law for a time." "The law! A barren desert of wherefore and whereas, of thence, whence, and hence, all in the service of pence. The last thing we need is more lawyers." He said this as much to the portrait on the wall as to me. The portrait and the hearth above which it hung were the only elements of warmth in the office, a fine yellow flame jumping on the hearth and a fine yellow dress on the woman in the portrait. The woman I took to be his long-dead wife, Charlotte. The fire, I learned, was stoked high on the last Monday of the month to warm the young woman whose regular visits provided my uncle with one of his favorite forms of entertainment. And she was even then arriving. My uncle's eyes brightened at something beyond my shoulder, and I turned to see her standing in the doorframe, head bowed beneath a hood, body shrouded in a dove-gray cape. Without a word from Mr. Stitch, the elderly doorkeep, she stepped into the room. "So then," said my uncle, as if he had only moments before sent her on an errand, "is it true?" The girl cast her eyes toward me. My uncle told her I was a trusted confidant, a term that surprised me more than it enlightened her. Then he closed the door behind her and told her to sit. She perched on the sofa by the fireplace and removed her hood.